Here's a painting by Arnsby Brown, a British painter. And we talked earlier about how our values get lighter as we go back into space. When it comes to color in aerial perspective, the fundamental thing we have to remember is that yellow, red, and blue react differently as we go back into space. In the foreground, we always have a presence of yellow, red, and blue. But as we go back into space, yellow is the first color that falls out because of the particles and the way light bends in the atmosphere. So then we're left with red and blue. This is why when you're out painting mountains, as we go farther back in space, those mountains get more violet. Then as we proceed back beyond those, maybe to the very last mountain in space, we're left with blue. And this is one of those principles that's like gravity. It happens no matter what type of day or type of light you're working in. As we look at the foreground, we have a lot of rich yellow that's in these greens. You can see here we have some rich, warm orange and reds in these browns of the cow as well. But as we go back in space, this yellow begins to fall out. This yellow here is nowhere near the richness of the yellow up front. And again, that's because yellow falls away. If we actually take a sample of the yellow that's way back here, and we bring it up here to the foreground, you will see how violet that yellow is back there. It only appears yellow because it's surrounded by all these cools that we see back in the background. If we take a sample of what we think is warm light on these green trees back here, and we place it in the foreground, you'll see it's not truly green. It's a violet. That yellow falls out that far back. There just cannot be yellow that far back in space. When we mix grays, there's enough yellow in our grays that will carry that gray and make it appear warm or green in the far distance against all these other cool colors. Learning to paint and teach painting in the Northwest in Oregon, it was an eye-opening experience because everything there is covered in green trees. That's why I chose the demo that we'll get to later, because this idea of green in the distance, there cannot be yellow back there. So there has to be another way to use that color in its proper place to make it appear green without having too much yellow in the distant color. So always remember to check your yellows as you go back in space. They move more toward a red than they do a yellow when they go back in space. I chose this painting by Hanson Puthuff because of the extreme aerial perspective that he used. You can see that this mountain feels very, very far away. Too far away for my taste in the distance that it really is. But it's the idea that I want to show that even in the lights, these colors are violet and blue. There really is not much yellow in these mixtures at all. You will see that when I take a sample of that background hill in light, what we think is warm light, is nowhere near any family that would be considered yellow or even red. We're in the blue family. But because it's surrounded by these really, really cool colors, it appears yellowy green. The reason why that mountain feels so far back in space is because he's pushed this concept. There's no middle ground helping step us from foreground to background, and that's why that feels so far back in space. If we bring up another one of his paintings, you'll see the beautiful transition between warm and cool as we move back. You can bet that these hills back here are covered in green foliage, but because there's so much atmosphere in this day, those yellows go away and we're left with reds and violets in here, which then appear to be warmer than the far distance hill and gives us a sense of a middle ground. It's amazing the jump he makes from here to this green, to this green, to this almost no green, to the red, to the violet. The highlight up here on the mountain is even violet. This is what happens in all atmosphere. This particular day just happened to be very thick with particles in the air. Before moving to the next image, what's interesting with this principle is that it happens in bright sunlight overcast light, and even when the image is cast in shadow. That bluing of the atmosphere will happen no matter what. I thought I'd share a few of my Grand Canyon sketches because the Grand Canyon really is about atmosphere. When you're standing on one of the rims looking across, there really isn't a middle ground. You have foreground and background. So there's always this giant jump between the warmth in the foreground and the coolness in the background. You'll see that I'm getting a lot of reflected light from a surface down below that's lit by the sun. And therefore, there are yellows and reds prevalent even in the shadows. But as I get back here to what we would call the middle ground in the Grand Canyon, which is actually background because it's so far away, you'll see that the atmosphere takes effect. And even these warm greens that we would think we'd see in the background are actually quite cool and gray compared to what we see up front. You'll also notice that in the shadows, there is a little bit of color change. There's a tiny bit of that green showing up here in the middle ground. As I go back farther in space, I'm left with less yellow and red, and the pigment begins to get quite blue. Even in the subtle reflected lights that you see here in the shadows, they still don't take on much yellow. That red is really quite a cool red, but being that it's against this cool blue, it will feel warmer than it really is. This atmosphere between the foreground and background had to remain established, otherwise my distance would fall apart. In this next example, I actually painted this from the north rim looking across at the south rim. And what's interesting is this whole cliffside over here was quite a ways away. It was technically a middle ground in my visual field. So when I painted it, I wasn't really able to use a real foreground warmth like I would see closer to my feet. I was already more than halfway away from the yellow and into the red family. You can see why these colors down here on the warm side of the cliff are not really that warm. Same with these reflected lights and the cools of the cliff back here. I'm already starting out pretty cool. And because of this, the true blue that you're seeing back here was so far in distance that it's right out of the tube blue. Well, when you have something that blue, you've got to make sure that the light and shadow that far distance are in their proper place. And that's why all my lights back here are so cool. They're technically still in a blue family. As I come forward, you'll see they start to take on a little bit more of the red family. This middle ground cliff, because it's beyond this middle ground, takes on less yellow and red than what we see in this right-hand cliff. So I had to be mindful of this yellow, red, and blue spectrum working in such a tight color space. If we take one last look at the image I'll be demonstrating from, you will see that this principle holds true. If we had sunlight in the foreground here, we would see a very high chroma yellow because we know in the middle distance here we have a tree that's beginning with some fall foliage, and it's got quite a bit of chroma even that far away. In the shadows here, we can see how vibrant the green is. There's more chroma in the color up front than there is in the far distance. We'll also notice how warm this green is compared to even this small jump into the background here. And again, from here way up to the mountaintop in the far distance, we go even cooler. So remember to look at the true color and not what the object is that we're looking at in the distance. These hills are covered in trees, but the color that we see is not green because not that much yellow can be that far back in the distance. So my challenge to you with this module is to really try and see color. If you have to turn your head sideways, do it. But go outside and study the distances and notice how things fall away as you look at them in this aerial perspective. The more you're able to grasp this and use it in creating your work, you'll give space and a believability to your paintings. Hi, my name is Mitch Baird, and I'm over the moon about working with you. What an opportunity. 365 days to work at your own pace, receive personal feedback, and have access to a community of growing artists. That's invaluable. Aesthetics and the art of picture making is a lifelong pursuit, full of questions and stumbling blocks, but it's also full of wisdom and rewards. In the 25 years I've been painting and teaching, I've found that there is a crucial and particular way of seeing that every artist must grasp if they want to obtain wisdom. This visual perception is so important that it will be the starting point of this course. I will share with you visual tools that will strengthen your artistic eye and that in turn will fortify your knowledge and creative abilities. There are also certain fundamentals that all artists must know and use in order to find rewards and create successful paintings. Composition is of the utmost importance, as it's the core of visual communication. I will share facets of design, arrangement, and keeping balance. Drawing will feature concepts on proportion, shape, and linear perspective, as they are the forces behind two-dimensional and three-dimensional space. The lessons on value will present insights on how to see values clearly and how the form principle affects everything in our visual field. Lastly, I will cover color, the final frontier in an artist's exploration. I will share the aspects of building a solid foundation on how to see and identify color, as well as mix it and use it with harmony. No matter your level of experience, the information shared in this course will elevate your understanding and will assist you in your search for excellence. I look forward to helping you along in your journey, as well as sharing mine with you too.